I've sat at the bedside of many dying people, and there was always a gathering of their loved ones. And I have identified on many occasions their loved ones by name and who I didn't know. And there was always a gathering. Sometimes you can feel a gathering building as the family are coming to collect the dying person. So what I know absolutely emphatically from my own experience is that nobody dies alone. So if you even just think about that, so somebody's there and they're dying, and their family and their grandparents and their friends and the whole family is gathered to come and collect them. And what, do they forget them? What, they go back to the spirit world and they forgot them? Or how did,
There was something wrong with the paperwork. They thought they were going to be there the next day, and then they ended up.
Well, they forgot his passport, and you're stuck to under the earth, you can't come with us.
Hello and welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. This is Cyrus, and we have a special guest on tonight who is Karen Frances McCarthy. So, Karen is named one of Ireland's top female broadcasters, a former Iraq war correspondent, and now medium and graduate from, among other places, the Arthur Findlay College, which I think a lot of people watching, they know what that is. After the tragic death of her husband, John, Karen went down the rabbit hole of the afterlife via John's dedicated interdimensional continued relationship with her. She is a published author and also penned a very popular Salon article titled Love, Sex, and Death, What My Fiance's Death Taught Me About the Afterlife, which I was a big fan of, especially for tackling topics like interdimensional tantric sex, which I'm also a big fan of. And so with that, I'm very happy to have Karen here with us. So Karen, how are you doing tonight?
Good, thank you, Cyrus. Thank you for having me.
And I do say tonight because in Ireland, what time is it now? Are you in Ireland?
No, I'm in New York at the moment.
Right, New York. Okay, so it is the afternoon there properly then. And
it's 8:30 in Ireland if we were there.
And here in Ukraine, it is 10:30. So good evening to me, and then good afternoon to you. So Karen, as you know, as I mentioned, it's great to have you here. I really have enjoyed your work. When your article came out a couple of years ago, right? I remember sharing it quite a bit. I was very happy about Salon as well, publishing something in this area. And your story is quite remarkable, and it's really interesting to hear people who have had transformations, for example, through the death of a close loved one, and how that actually begins a foray into mediumship of all things. So I gave a little bit of an introduction about yourself, but can you tell us a little about your side of the story and how you came to be where you are now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I wrote, in that story, and I think I've told you also, I've since finished a manuscript of the complete story that we're talking to publishers. My agent is talking to publishers about at the moment. So hopefully we'll see that out next year or in 2020. But so what I wrote about in that story, and I've since written a bunch of stuff and given a bunch of talks on this, is how, and I actually like the word awakening when these things happen, because I really think it really kind of comes down to a question of awareness. The unseen world is always present, and we are either aware of it or we're not. And quite often I feel in people's lives, there is some kind of crisis, or there is something triggers people to actually look into these spaces where we've never really looked before, and actually to start to see all of the other aspects of life that we don't generally see in our sort of four-dimensional world, So I think when, obviously the transition, or the sort of the awakening that was sparked in me when he died was quite sort of substantial and marked, because I really had been, as you mentioned, a major media journalist, a political correspondent. I was an Iraq war correspondent. I worked, in network news. And so it took me a very, very long time to actually accept what was going on, because I was completely faithless skeptic at that point. And so it took me quite a long time of just really having all of these different incidences and events and experiences happen for me to finally just have to come to terms with the fact that there was no other explanation for any of this. This wasn't grief-induced delirium. This wasn't anything else. These things were actually really happening. And as soon as I sort of accepted all of these things, and I know I've talked about some of them with you, Cyrus, before, is that was when the path to a real awakening and a real discovery and exploration started. All of that said, when I was a child, I would see, which is very common, I think, I would see the dearly departed in the living room and scare the life out of my mother, and not know the difference between the living people and the discarnate people, and would have different experiences throughout my life. But as I got into sort of my 20s and on, anything that I heard, anything that I saw, I just dismissed it as some sort of a stress-related sort of delirium until he died, and then it became really apparent that it just became way too much. It was like a critical mass, and I just couldn't try to write that off in any supposedly rational way anymore. Your microphone's not on, Cyrus.
Oh, my microphone is not on. It may help if I turn it on. You mentioned in your article, death was something more, you realized rather, death was something more than decompiled atoms en route to cosmic reabsorption. Consciousness couldn't be an emergent property of the brain. It clearly survived in some form, but what? And this is when you were beginning to find out about the afterlife. Why is it that you think it takes an awakening experience to realize these things? Why can't people just find these things out naturally?
Well, because I think that the biggest thing is that these are not intellectual subjects. They're not academic subjects. They're not subjects we can think our way into. My feeling is we need to experience these things, because it's the experience that challenges what we think is our rational mind and forces us to accept that things are not the way we think they are. We're so conditioned to think what we see is the way it is. We're so conditioned to think that time is linear and constant, and that everything we're looking at around us is solid, that it really takes something to challenge all our perceptions to make us realize that what we think we perceive is not really what is in truth existence. And so it takes, in my experience, it has taken a lot of direct experience challenging those presumptions for me to be able to start to think in a completely different way. So I really feel that to get around and to accept what's going on and to challenge and upend everything we think we know, we actually have to experience that. I don't think we can. We can sit and analyze and read reports and do everything till the cows come home. But I don't feel that we'll really challenge our way of thinking until we experience the alternative. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, and do you think that as somebody who is very well-regarded career woman, do you think that the so-called rat race and in a constant grind to get ahead in our careers and all of these things, does that also disconnect us from becoming aware of this much greater topic?
Well, I think it really depends on your intent in getting ahead, because, we can all have, people call what I do as a medium a gift, and I've never considered it a gift. I feel like it's an ability the same way as my writing was an ability, my journalism, anything else was an ability. And we all have different abilities. And my feeling is like, what are we in flow with and what we are being true to? I mean, if your aptitude is to make money and you're very good at making money, well, make money, but then what are you doing with all of the money? Are you tithing some of the money? What are you using some of that money for? If you have a particular aptitude for that, if you're really aligned with the good that can be done with that, then I feel like, that's being true to who you are, and it's taking what your particular gift is and really being able to use that to contribute to people and the world at large. Does that make sense? So I really feel like it's really being the best we can be in whatever our particular abilities are and whatever we can best contribute with is what we should be doing. So it's not really a question of, if we're on Wall Street making a lot of money, I feel like, does that pull us away from spirituality or our sense of oneness, or these bigger existential questions? I just really feel like it's, what are you doing down there? How are you treating people down there? What are you using your ability to do? Are you using that to contribute to the highest good and well-being of other people?
So is it possible to use if you have a job on Wall Street, on your individual life, if you're showing so much kindness or spiritual attributes to people around you, you could still be on a kind of a nice spiritual path, even in our materialistic culture?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and it's the same with everything. It's our attitude towards everything. I mean, I've said to someone the other day, we're in this big hole. I don't want to get too political, but we're in this sort of era now where it's all about make America great again. And to me, that was a slogan that was probably relevant to where we were as the human race back in the Cold War and before that. But now we know that the way to make America great again is to make America green. You know, is to lead the world in the green, because ultimately what's going to kill us is the planet, you know, not some enemy someplace. And so my feeling is that no matter what you are doing in life, even if you're farming, even if you're a livestock farmer, even if you're part of this whole, you know, food chain that I'm vegetarian, so I have obviously issues with it. It's like, it depends on how we do it. You know, it depends on how we treat the animals. It depends on how we treat other people. The Dalai Lama says, you know, religion is kindness, or, you know, and that's really ultimately what all spirituality is to me. Kindness. What can we do with what we have to help other people? In my case, I have this ability to become aware and communicate with discarnate consciousness, which helps the bereaved. So I feel like it's my job to do that as best I can, to help the bereaved. But that doesn't mean I'm any more spiritual than somebody who's a philanthropist or who's helping some, you know, starving people, or just you know, abused people, or anything else. You know, I really feel that ultimately our spirituality is oneness and kindness, and it's the most spiritual we can be is to take what we are most gifted in and use that for the good of other people.
And we can apply this to our careers as well, I would add. Then we find what you're most gifted at, and that can be our path to not necessarily be bound in kind of materialistic culture. But I want to and now ask you a bit more specifically then about what you've learned about communicating to your significant others, to John, from this side to that side. And I know many people watch this channel or participate in the Afterlife Topics group who have lost their spouses. And if those people are watching right now, what kind of advice, as a medium and as somebody who has awakened to all of this, what kind of advice could you give them?
Well, there's a couple of things, and that's a very, very, very big question. One thing I do want to come back to, in case I forget, I do want to come back to misinformation and superstition. But before I talk about that, the one thing that, first thing I would say is love endures. So love does not die. And because your spouse or your child or your whoever has passed the spirit world, does not actually end the relationship. What it does is, if we don't have the sensitivity to be aware of them, it might end our ability to recognize when they are present with us, but they are nevertheless present with us. Now, they're not present with us every single minute of the day, any more than they were present with us when they were walking around on two legs every single minute of the day, but they are with us. So all it takes to really, for your loved one to become aware of you or connect with you and vice versa, is to turn your thoughts to them. It's that simple. We don't need any great ritual. We don't need any great ability. It's just really, again, it comes down to awareness. You know, when we are open to recognizing, and I actually do a whole workshop in this called Induced Communications, to help people get to the point where they can not doubt. The doubt is the killer. If you doubt that your loved one is beside you, then that immediately is going to make it incredibly difficult for you and for them to really accept that they're there. But they will be there and they will be helping. I mean, we hear this all the time with signs. So even people who are not mediumistic or are not that sensitive can learn how to recognize the signs of their loved ones, trying to line up ducks for them or make them aware of things or just let them know that they're present. So that's one thing.
When there is somebody on that side who's connecting to us, is it that they can be in multiple places at once? So they're doing something on that side, they feel us thinking about them, and they're doing whatever they love to do in this higher dimension, and at the same time they're communicating with us. Does it work kind of like that? Has John given you any information about how that works?
Well, I think that one of the challenges about when we start talking about the afterlife, or we start talking about other dimensions, is that we can only understand them through the lens of our own experience, which means we interpret everything through the lens of 4 dimensions, with the physical dimensions we live in, which means that I think there is a natural tendency for us to believe that the higher dimensions are geographically someplace else. In my experience, they're not, because there is no geography. We know that from science. There is actually nothing solid. We know that what we perceive to be real is not what we actually think it is. We know that time is not linear and not constant. We also know that it's a construct of this dimension. So that I feel like sometimes I think the only way we can understand the next dimension is by applying the rules of this one as we understand them to it. Do you understand what I mean? So I feel my sense is that there's no geography. They're not someplace else. That's very hard for us when we've only got this experience of this world to even think about. I mean, how do we even think about there's no such thing as time? You know, our minds are so entrenched in this existence that trying to understand that there's no such thing as past, present, or future is impossible for us, really. So to try to answer your question, the reason I've sort of gone off on this tangent with this is that I don't feel that they are someplace else, because I feel like all we have here is thought, and we're communicating with thought. So that, you know, if I say to my mother, who's now in the spirit world, who's incredibly quick, I say to my mother, Mum, are you here? Before I've even finished asking the question in my mind, I can feel my mother touching my face. You know, so it's not like she has to get from someplace to me. It's just that I know I'm probably making this sound very convoluted, but my experience has been that it's not like there is some other place. There's just a different state of being, if I can say it like that, if that makes sense.
Well, can we say then basically telepathy? Because if there's a telepathic communication, then it's instantaneous and doesn't matter the location of where it's at. So for example, you're in New York, I'm in Kiev, but telepathically I could just poof immediately connect with you. So it could essentially be something along those lines of a telepathic connection that I guess is a quantum.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's much more a better description, I feel, of the way we communicate than the way we would communicate walking around on this planet, you know, in physical form.
But the interesting thing is that you can be in telepathic communion with somebody while engaged in your own activities. And for example, you could be playing golf and then be in a telepathic connection with somebody by just focusing on them. So the thing that is completely location independent is the power of thought. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. It's consciousness is what makes the community. This is why we call it incarnate beings and discarnate beings, or discarnate consciousness, incarnate consciousness. It's just all consciousness.
Show you what I got. And we need to get a baby.
Someone is talking, and I think that Deanna, I might have to mute you. So, well, have you learned anything through John about conditions on the other side? Because I've also had experiences about this with my out-of-body experiences and astral travel work and communications with my deceased family members. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I'm curious to ask this to see if anything corresponds. So have you learned anything specifically about where your fiance is and what he's doing on the other side?
Well, I've asked every so often, what are you doing? What's going on? And what he has done is showing me an image which approximates what's going on for him. Because again, I don't believe I can completely understand what's going on for him, because I'm not in that dimension. And so I'm speaking about this as a medium whose communication all happens for me here, So I'm not doing astral travel. I'm here with people communicating with me. So I for example, have, you know, leaned on him quite heavily in the first couple of years to help me the way he had always helped me with different things, with work, with whatever. And I remember at one point having this whole drama go on and asking him to help me, and eventually the whole thing took days. The whole thing got resolved, and I said to him after it was all settled, I said, how are you feeling now? And he showed me himself sleeping, you know. So I know in the spirit world, he doesn't have to be sleeping, but what he's telling me is that whatever has gone on here for the last 3 days, he's exhausted by the whole thing too, you know, and now needs to have a little rest. So I feel like the communication has been approximate so that he's communicating with me in my frame of reference, you know, so that I can, but then that's how mediumship works, is just kind of people communicate with us within our frame of reference, like a dream, like sharing a dream. And then I use that information that has been given to me to interpret that and communicate that to the loved one sitting in front of me. So it's all about sort of approximation and interpretation when you're working with mediumship. What I can say is that I have seen him change, and not just him, because since he died, my mother, my father died. I mean, other people very close to me have died since he died. That I have actually seen, particularly with him, because we were in such a close relationship and we were communicating every day, and we were, you know, very much still involved in each other's lives and have been since. I can actually see changes. I've seen changes in him. So I do know that this idea of growing and healing does certainly seem to be happening in the spirit, because I have actually seen that happen with him, you know, if that makes sense. If I could tell you, does he have a job? I have no idea. What I do know is as a spirit and as a person, as a consciousness, things that he didn't or couldn't say or do while he was here walking around, he has since begun to do those. So I can see healing has been going on there for him in the spirit world.
Yeah, it's something I often do talk about, is our continued growth, not just we become instantly perfect. And that actually leads me into what I really want to talk to you about, and I'm hoping people watching can benefit from, is you mentioned misconceptions or myths about the afterlife, or connecting with our deceased loved ones or our spouses. And I saw from the Salon article that you wrote how you were told by different peers that your connection with him was holding him back, or that you were keeping him out of the light. And that was one reason, well, one of numerous reasons I really liked your article, because that's such a common misconception, that you're holding somebody back, or you're somehow, I don't know. I mean, maybe you can shed some light on this misconception. Like, where does it come from? Why do people think this? What's really going on?
Well, again, I think a lot of this comes back to the idea that we can't understand really what's going on in the afterlife fully until we get to the afterlife. You know, there's only so much we can understand from our vantage point here. And again, what happens is a few things. One is there are religious inferences there, even if people say they're not religious. There still is an awful lot of early conditioning that has come if you're Christian from reading the Bible. You know, there's an awful lot of just conditioning that's there, it's bred into us over time. And so we don't realize that these are perceptions that we're bringing and imposing on new experiences to help us understand them. The other thing is that there's still this idea, oh, we shouldn't be dabbling with that. That's, you know, and again, I think this is an old thing, and it's an old religious idea that somebody dies, you're supposed to let them just go and rest in peace. And that's, you know, all we have to do is look at the references in the Bible, even in the Old Testament particularly, to see, oh, that's always been taboo. And so I feel what happens is that there has been, in many cases in my experience, people who have that taboo is very much woven into the tapestry of their belief system. And so they use that and they impose that as their way of interpreting information that's come to them. Do you understand what I mean? Or does it make sense what I'm saying? It's like, you know, if you believe that you're not supposed to dabble with people in the afterlife, and then somebody comes along and says, oh, I talk to my dead husband every day, the immediate thing is, oh, that's got to be bad. And then all of this sort of badness and superstition and negativity gets heaped on that experience. And that's what I found a lot. And a lot of it is also, it's just people accepting things that they've been told as they've been growing up or in society or whatever, and not actually not having direct experience possibly, and certainly not having done an awful lot of self-education on the subject. I mean, we've really gone beyond people's personal opinions. I mean, there's so much study going on in various different institutions that are exploring, I mean, what's really helped, as you know, is the near-death experience. I mean, the advancement of science has allowed people to be resuscitated. We've got more and more documented near-death experiences to rely on as well. So we've got to move with the times, and I feel like a lot of this superstition is stuck in the Middle Ages.
It does seem like the Middle Ages, doesn't it? And what do you think about when somebody gets after-death contact experiences and they say, oh no, grandpa's a ghost and he's haunting my house now because he moved his painting and whispered in my ear. And what do I do? Do I talk to a priest? You've probably seen this phenomenon, haven't you?
All the time, all the time. And again, it comes back to what you also, so for instance, your grandpa dies, and he's painted you a painting, it's hanging on your wall, and he comes back, and next thing he knocks the painting, and you think, oh my God, grandpa is roaming the earth, he's lost, he's not made it into the afterlife, and he's here haunting me and moving paintings around. When really what your grandpa is trying to say is, I'm here, I love you, I'm okay, I'm just trying to show you I'm here and I love you. And that's all he's trying to do. But instead, if you're coming from a place of fear or superstition and you haven't challenged your belief systems about this, you're going to believe he's lost and wandering the earth, as opposed to he's just popped in to say, I'm here and I love you, and I'm going to tap on this little painting I painted because you'll associate that with me and you'll know it's me.
Something that was demoralizing was, I think it was on Reddit, it might have been the Reddit subreddit Ghost, so it's an internet forum, the most popular internet forum, I guess. Somebody posted a story very similar to that one I just mentioned, and the top voted comments was all, he's a ghost now, and you have to do this cleansing ritual and burn the sage to get him out of your house. And I made a comment about basically what we just discussed, and nobody read it. People downvoted the comment at the bottom of the page. Nobody would care about this, and it makes me think that it's like an educational crisis happening about how people perceive the afterlife. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, one thing can I just say before we go on, in case I forget, and it's quite important, is suicides. Because I've come across, as working as a medium, people have come in and sat in front of me who have been to somebody else who's told them that because their child or their spouse or somebody close to them committed suicide, that they are destined to wander the earth and never make it to the heavens, or all of these things are lost. And I actually just wanted to comment on that before we get off the subject, because I have absolutely no idea why anybody would want to say something like that to somebody. Again, it comes back to this very old, unchallenged notion that suicides, it used to be a Catholic Church thing, you suicide, you have to go to purgatory, you can't go to heaven. This was an old thing. But the truth of the fact is that, nobody's wandering the earth lost. How can you be lost? I don't even understand how that's a concept. How can you be lost? And on top of that, I've sat at the bedside of many dying people, and there was always a gathering of their loved ones. And I have identified on many occasions their loved ones by name, and I didn't know. And there was always a gathering. Sometimes you can feel a gathering building as the family are coming to collect the dying person. So what I know absolutely emphatically from my own experience is that nobody dies alone. So if you even just think about that, so somebody's there and they're dying, and their family and their grandparents and their friends and the whole family is gathered to come and collect them. And what, do they forget them? What, they go back to the spirit world and they forgot them? Or how did,
There was something wrong with the paperwork. They thought they were going to be there the next day, and then they ended up.
Well, they forgot his passport, and you're stuck to wander the earth, you can't come with us. These things just don't make sense. So really, again, I feel it comes back to preconceived notions that have not been challenged, that have been kind of bred into us over the generations. I have communicated with many, many people who have committed suicide. And I can also honestly tell you that I have felt and have been able to explain this to the person sitting with me, to the mother or the spouse sitting with me, how that person feels. They are surrounded by their loved ones and love, and they are there to heal. And I'm not saying, oh, that means you can go off and commit suicide, because I feel like we're here for a reason, we're here for a path, and see it through to the end, you know. But for people who are in so much pain that they commit suicide, they're not punished for that, but they really will have to do a lot of healing, you know, when they get to the spirit world. So I don't, and I've seen this over and over and over again, and I've been able to witness the growth in those people. As you know, I had a woman whose son committed suicide 5 years ago, and certainly he's in a different place now than he was 5 years ago. Again, it comes back to the idea of growth and healing. So these are just these notions where the superstition and the unchallenged preconceived notions just don't make sense. Not only do they not make sense, they can actually do an awful lot of harm. And that's my concern with them. People who have a certain belief system are going to believe what they believe. And so let them. I mean, you know, but that should not be imposed to do harm on other people. Does that make sense, the way I'm saying that?
Yes, of course. And I want to also ask you something, or bring up a topic which is relevant to me, and I think viewers like to talk about this as well. And there's, I'll just paraphrase a statement that's been made to me that I've heard quite frequently on the Afterlife Topics forum. And it's oftentimes mentioned by a friend of mine. I've been on her show a few times, who's very popular in the afterlife field. And the paraphrase statement is, sex is a materialistic impulse, and we have no need for it after we cross over. In the afterlife, everybody is like a brother and sister, and so the idea of sexuality and romantic love disappears after we die, where we can become pure and God's children again. What do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not going to, like I said, I don't want to say anything ill of anybody else in their belief system, because belief systems, as we know, are very hard to shake. What I can tell you is that we don't change. We don't suddenly get to the afterlife and become different people. We get to the afterlife as the same people we were, and we continue to grow. This has been my experience of communicating directly with hundreds of people who are complete strangers who I don't know, who come in because they belong to somebody sitting in front of me, is that we don't, so my mother is still my mother. She still feels like my mother. She still acts like my mother. My father, I can see their personalities very clearly and how they communicate with me, you know. My fiance, I can see he's been there longer, and I can see more changes in him, but he is still being that person. Now, when somebody says there's no need for sex in the afterlife, there's no need for copulation in the afterlife. But what is sex? Sex is the absolute union, like a soul union between two people. It's an expression of that sort of soul bond between two people. If we're talking about it in the context of more like love making, as opposed to just copulation. So why would you not? I mean, it's the closest and most intimate connection you can have with an individual. So why all of a sudden would that connection just become irrelevant? It becomes, to me, even more relevant. Even more relevant because the physical aspect of it has gone away, and you've got what you've got there is the soul bond. That's far more intimate than, I think I said to a friend of mine once, she said, I told her, I was able to blend with my fiance in such a way that was so intense, and the connection was so intense that it wasn't like anything I had ever experienced on this planet, even with him, And I said that, being able to blend atom for atom in that way with a discarnate consciousness makes an orgasm feel like a back scratch, And we laughed about it, but that's the closest approximation I can make to what that kind of union actually is. And so when we talk about sex, I'm talking about union, that sort of soul union that we get when we're in an intimate position like that with somebody that we love.
And a big part of your article was mentioning basically interdimensional tantric sex. And do you think that this is something people who have lost their spouses could possibly be able to experience, or if they could work toward creating a connection and then maybe being able to continue that kind of soul-based sexual relationship still?
Well, I think it needs to start with just having the sensitivity to sense their presence. You know, I think that's where you've got to be able to sense, because you've got to be able to sense the presence, because the sensory experience really is an internal experience. And so it's not really about, I actually have never done, I know there's courses you can do and classes you can go to on tantric sex. I've never done that. And I'm not saying that that's what somebody should do, because frankly, it's beyond my own experience. But what I can say is that it's really more about the blending and the union of your spirit and your loved one's spirit. And that's, for me, where the focus begins. And the more you can develop your sensitivity and your receptivity to be able to feel their presence blending with you, the more you will start to experience the intensity of that union. So sex is a completely inadequate word for this experience. You know, I think the article is called Love, Sex and Death Sells. You know, it's eye-catching, but the book is not called that. You know, and I don't ever refer to this experience as a sexual experience. You know, it's a blending. You know, it's more like I think Thich Nhat Hanh has an expression for it that's just gone out of my head at the moment. If it comes to me, I'll share it with you. But it's really experiencing a oneness in a way that we can't experience it when we're in separate bodies. And it's experience a oneness in a way that we can never experience in the physical act of sex.
But what about like romantic love energy, which sounds kind of woo-woo. I don't know what people understand what I'm saying here, but basically like when there's a romantic relationship, it doesn't feel the same way as loving your sibling or loving a parent. I mean, the romantic relationship is a very specific energy that has what we interpret as quote sexual, but it's not the same, right? It's a different type of energy. And I think that this is something that a lot of people who have lost their spouses, they want to know that they still have access to that. Do you think that they do? Or are you saying that all that?
Yeah, no, again, it comes back to what I was saying earlier. People don't change. Your spouse is your spouse. You know, my fiance feels like my fiance. My mother feels like my mother. You know, my father feels like my father. Somebody's child will still be their child. And so if you have that type of an intimate relationship, and I know what you mean by romance, but romance is like a little cherry compared to what the depth of what this intensity of feeling between two people is, obviously, which is what I think we're talking about here, where we've got that intense sort of soul mate, I suppose, for want of a better word, connection with somebody that we love. Like somebody asked me, will I still be married in the afterlife? Well, that person you're still going to have that relationship with somebody in the afterlife. Do they have contracts in the afterlife? I doubt it. But, you know, so but the intention and the relationships remain the same, in my experience.
And that's a big point, is basically what you were saying about everybody remaining the same. And that almost sounds like the thesis of what you're saying tonight, because a lot of people say not only do we not remain the same, for example, we all merge into source consciousness. Famously talked about in this channel, Tom Campbell, who has said that the people we meet on the other side are just facsimiles of who they once were, being projected to us as holograms because the real them are now part of God and they don't exist tangibly. All this kind of like metaphysical mumbo jumbo that causes a lot of people anxiety. So it is your estimation that people very much are still on the same path from where they left off in this life, now continuing into another dimension. Is that right?
Well, that's been my experience, definitely, in a whole slew of different types of relationships once I've had to sort of mediate the communication between the person there and the person here. But what you're talking about is not, I don't know, the thing is that, say, Buddhism, for instance, you know, people misinterpret that quite a lot. They think, oh, we reincarnate as the same person. But in Buddhist philosophy, that's not what happens. In Buddhist philosophy, we return to, you know, and we come back. Because the Buddhists don't believe in a soul. So if you die, there's no soul to reincarnate. So it's a very complex sort of aspect of Buddhist philosophy. And, you know, in Christian dogma, it's like we die and we go to heaven to become one with God. So in a lot of New Age, it's the same thing. We just go back to the source. Now, if it were possible where people just came back as a facsimile of how they had been, then we would never see any change in them when they communicate over time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I've made the same point. It doesn't line up with spirit communication. It
doesn't, because there is definitely developments. You know, like I've said this, and I've said it in my book. My fiance was incapable of saying "I love you." He could only ever say it when he'd say it when he had a drink, or he'd say it in text message. But he had this issue about being he was modeling, and he'd never want to say "I love you." You know. And when he went to the spirit world first, it took like 10 months before I heard that message. And I was, oh, well, somebody's getting over some issues in the spirit world. You know, he started sending me love hearts and it was unusual, but it took some time. You know, had he just gone to the spirit world and some medium started saying to me, oh, he's telling you how much he loves you, I would have been like, that's not him. Because he could never come out with those words. But it took him 10 months before he started showing me love hearts. So I could see that whatever was going on, his issue was, he was healing or growing or whatever. I've seen this with all sorts of people. You know, I've seen this with abusive fathers and neglectful mothers, and the apology that took 20 years to come back with. Now, if that was a facsimile of certain certain energy or an imprint that had been left after somebody just sort of reintegrated with the source, then I don't see how that would be possible.
Exactly. They'd just be a holographic replica or something, and it doesn't line up with any element of spirit communication, or also in my case astral experiences, having experiences on that side, which also lines up with people being themselves still, but growing organically, because that's the only thing that matters, is if it's real, if it's actual growth. So at this point, we're going to turn things over in a minute to some of the patrons in the audience to ask questions. And this is the point I want to mention, that if you're watching this, you're enjoying this interview with Karen, please go down and hit that subscribe button, notification bell. Really helps keep the channel going. If we get people liking the video, sharing the video, commenting, subscribing, it takes a lot of work to keep the YouTube stuff going, keep the YouTube algorithm happy. It's a bit insatiable. You have to keep feeding it to keep it happy. So any help in that area is appreciated. And if you want to become a patron yourself and join us, keep the channel going, and ask wonderful guests questions, then you can sign up at the Patreon page, patreon.com/Afterlife Topics, or Afterlife University, which is afterlifetopics.com/university. With all that out of the way, I will now turn it over to see if anybody has any questions for our guests. So, can
I just say, sorry, just one thing before we go to that, just to support your last question. You know, spiritualist belief, for example, believes in sort of 7 levels of existence. After when we're in the first, and we die into the second, and we progress in the 7th as the source, and that over, and who knows how long a level lasts, right? A stage lasts. But this is something that was channeled by Andrew Jackson Davis, who's considered the father of spiritualism from upstate New York. It's something that has been channeled through other mediums as well. And it's where the idea of the spirit guides comes from. Like, this is the other thing. If you feel you have a guide or a guardian angel or anybody, they can't just be part of one sort of free-floating, indiscriminate source. They have to be on different levels of existence, right? Because they're more advanced. And so the philosophy, like Andrew Jackson Davis introduced, was that we continue to grow. And Edgar Cayce talked about this in terms of soul groups as well, where we continue, we are here, we live here, we die into the next level, we die into the next stage, and then we live whatever we have to live and learn, and then we keep advancing and advancing. So for instance, Silver Birch, who is a fairly well-known spirit guide of a late medium, Maurice Barbanel, this English medium, he used to describe the fact that the information that was being channeled to Maurice Barbanel was coming from very, very highly evolved beings who had to sort of leapfrog it to Silver Birch and then to Maurice Barbanel, because Maurice Barbanel's consciousness wasn't advanced enough to be able to reach that high into the higher realms. And I feel there's a place in New York you've probably heard of called the IAC. They do out-of-body training. I don't know if you've heard of them, but I've come across their founder as well, said the same thing. In his astral travels, he met people on different levels and spheres of existence. And so there seems to be a lot of different ways from different belief systems coming to support this idea that there is an advancement through stages of existence and through awareness and through consciousness as we go on. And again, that is far more consistent with my experience of mediumship than this idea that either we go into the bardo for 49 days and reincarnate, that the Buddhists believe in, or that we just all end up back in the light, whatever the light is, the source. So there actually is some philosophy out there that does support this idea of advancing stages of existence through the afterlife.
Well, yeah, I mean, with astral experiences, there's literally mediums on what we call the astral plane who are connecting with people who have gone to higher dimensional places. Just like with the Silver Birch examples, the Silver Birch was a Native American who was actually a medium on what we call the astral plane, who was basically channeling information from an even higher level. So it was 3 levels of communication. And yet even in the Silver Birch teachings, I recall some mention of people it's strange to use the word infinite, but perpetually growing. Like there is this level where we are once again God and source consciousness, but it seems the funny thing is that we're never quite there. It's like we're in a state of perpetual growth and development. And I suppose if we did finally reach the end of the game, then we would be God again. But it seems like the very essence of the individual existence is that it's in a perpetual state of yet higher levels, yet more growth. And that's
and I do feel people will change over time, but it's also like this life here. I mean, the way you are at 20 is hardly the way you are at 80. Like we really do grow and become different people. We're still the same person, but we are also becoming different people. Do you know what I mean? So
well, yeah, I mean, that's like the essence remains the same while what the behavior changes to, greater levels, I suppose. So you can still identify the essence of somebody even if they've changed quite a bit. Because I mean, I think when I was 15, I was probably a little bit of an idiot, and then you compare me after 30, and I think my behavior, my parts about me are greatly different, probably for the better, to be honest. But the essence is still there, the essence of Cyrus, and that maybe we could even argue that is the higher self, which is that core essence, which is sort of in a perfect state. But we are working through that, I suppose. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But anyway, okay. So do any patrons have any questions for Karen? Not everybody at once now. There's a bunch of you guys here, so if you have anything you want to ask or add to the conversation, now's a good time to drop it out there.
So it sounds like, Karen, that you don't really want to say that you think there's a physicality to the afterlife. You're not quite sure, or like you say, we are just kind of projecting what we think is going to be there as physical. Am I getting that right? Well,
I think it's very hard to know, Corey, what's going on in the afterlife until we're in the afterlife, because we don't know what plane of existence we're on. Even astral travelers, you don't necessarily know what plane of existence you're on. I feel like we can only understand information within our own frame of reference. That's the big thing I've really realized. So we have, there's plenty of accounts of astral travelers and people having out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences where they're actually meeting individuals that they knew in this life. Now, but I can honestly say also, when I'm working mediumistically, I can see and feel people belonging to somebody else. That feels very real, but I know it's not real. It's consciousness communicating, projecting an image of what they looked like for me, for that person to understand who they are. So it's something I've always said, and I don't want to sort of say anything negative about anybody, but I've seen people advertise themselves as afterlife experts, and I really honestly don't know how anyone can be an afterlife expert if you're not in the afterlife. Because everything we do is, and we know that the afterlife is very fluid, it's very thought responsive. I mean, Monroe has talked about this, Bullman has talked about this, how thought responsive the afterlife is. And we even know here, they say, oh, our thoughts manifest. We know it's very clunky, like Jersey cows wandering along. But what we understand in the spirit world is it's much more fluid, it's much faster, it's much more thought responsive. So I think we need to get very, very careful about what we start speaking about absolute truths about the afterlife when we're not there. And when we know that thought can actually manifest so much faster there than it can here. Do you understand what I mean? That makes sense by that. So I'm not saying there's no physicality there, but we got to understand too is what we think is physical in this world, the quantum physicists have told us, is not what we thought it was either.
Sure. I think for me, what it is the only reason why I even participate in this and is because of my dream experiences or astral experiences, which, I can pick up an object, I can feel the object, I can taste the object, I can throw it, I can do a lot of physical things, but when I wake up, I know I wasn't physically there.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
So that's what brings me into that. But you being a medium and talking to so many different people, I'm sure they've asked, well, what are they doing? What are my loved ones doing over there? What are they occupying their time with? There has to be a general consensus that you've seen where it seems to be just like they're doing now. I mean, it's basically a continuation of what's happening now.
Well, I don't know for sure. I mean, I can talk on an individual case. I don't like making generalizations, to be honest, because I really don't like to because I don't want to be saying, oh, this is how it all is in the afterlife, because again, I have to issue the caveat. No one really knows. Right. All I can do is talk about from my own experience and what people have told me about what they're doing in the afterlife. And so just to give you an example, I communicated once with a young girl who had died. She was only 16, 17, I think. And she had died in childbirth, and the baby died as well. And when I communicated with her, she came pushing a little stroller with the baby in it for the person. It was her school teacher she came to see. The school teacher was sitting in the audience of this church in England I was doing a service at. And this girl told me that what she was doing was she was helping other children cross over, So that's how she explained it to me. She was helping children come. I say cross over because that's, it's just the word we understand as, getting from where we are to where we're going. And it was just a matter of sort of helping them sort of come in and settle in. And that's what she told me she was doing. I know Andrew Jackson Davis has reported seeing instances of children who have passed over still in school there. What that really tangibly looks like, I don't know, but I know that's the intention of what's going on, and that's how it visibly, in terms of visually manifests for us. The kids are in school, so I know that's from him.
I actually think, and I will say it is a good reminder about, we can't say for sure about the afterlife, just our experiences. I mean, I have a few books out. And even in those books, ultimately, what I can do is just say, these are my experiences. But if someone's asking me questions, I can't say, this is what you will experience, but I can say, what I have experienced. And when it comes to physicality, I kind of think maybe to tie this into the bigger theme of the interview, when it comes to mythologies or even things dating back to medieval times, I feel like the physicality issue may be one of those mythologies that has kind of hard coded it into our psyche, or one of these fossilized mythologies, so to speak, where because, for example, somebody passes away and then they join with theological concept of heaven, for example, or serving God in a heavenly environment with clouds and cherubs and things like that, it has left our conscious perception the idea that another dimension may look and feel very similar to this dimension, because again, it's not the cherubs, it's not the clouds, and not these conceptions I think we have kind of stuck in our minds. And so when I hear about a child in the afterlife or going to school, for me personally, as somebody who has communicated with many, many deceased people as well, and has had many of these astral experiences, for me, I see that as exactly they're in a temple or they're in a school, and then they go in and they sit down. And the added difference is the high interdimensional mental capacity. So they might be doing that, but they have the abilities that we don't have here, the abilities to connect on that interdimensional level to people and places. And that can include teleportation. You think about a place and then you can poof, you can be there. But it doesn't mean that they are doing this as a vaporous, phantasmagoric spirit. It means that we have control over the energy around us that we interpret as physical matter, because as you mentioned, Karen, it's like physical matter. What we think of as physical isn't actually physical. So what we think of as non-physical could also be physical, and vice versa, because it's all just energy systems that take up substance. So that's kind of my thoughts about this based on my experiences. And, you know, of course, I'm not trying to say this is for everybody, but those are my thoughts. Does anybody in the audience, or Karen, anybody have any thoughts about that?
Just one other person I just remembered who came to me. It was a man who had never really applied himself in life, and he kept showing me a library, like he was trying to tell his wife that he was actually applying himself, he was actually studying, he was actually learning. Now, you know, these are all things that we can understand that, you know, would be plausible in the afterlife. But if you ask me if somebody was a mechanic here, are they a mechanic there? I don't really see why there would be a need for a mechanic there, you know. So I feel like it's an opportunity not to continue what we were doing, but to continue from who we are and where we want to grow from where we are, as opposed to what we do. And if in the case of, say, that child or that woman who died in childbirth, you know, that is something that she's able to do, to give, you know, to help other people, to contribute in a way. And so it's part of her growth and her path. And I feel like it made sense to me that she would be doing that. You know, but if somebody said I'm still a truck driver, I'd be like, why would you still be a truck driver? You know, so.
Have you ever heard something like that as a medium? Somebody saying, I'm still a truck driver?
No.
Well, I mean, I think that the issue that people have, it's not so much as like, are there physical systems where cars break down? You have to get under you have to open the hood up and you have to fix the transmission or whatever. I think that the issue that people have, or the anxiety that people have, is that you can't be like physically in a space interacting with people, sitting in a chair and having this individual existence. But I think it's the idea that somebody is transmuted basically into like information. So not even existing in any physical, tangible way, but being like a computer code, being like a program or something that you can access, but it's not like a real thing. And this is what a lot of people, because since I came out with my first book, this is like a major theme of people emailing me of the thing that brings them anxiety, including like when a spouse dies or a family member, is that they get this idea that there's no physical, tangible existence. People are just programs now, computer code, not real things. And that's one of the things that I'm always pushing against, is that concept, because direct spirit communication never, in my opinion, has ever indicated that, but philosophy and interpretations have. So somebody reads about or hears about what we're talking about tonight, and then they come to a conclusion like that, and then they tell other people that, and then that idea spreads. But I don't know if, does that make any sense to you, Karen?
Absolutely. I mean, I really think so much of the misinformation that goes around is really just us layering preconceived notions and perceptions onto situations we don't quite understand, as opposed to just trying to suspend all our notions and just trying to be completely open to what on earth is going on here. It could be anything. Let's just throw open what our perception may be, and just try to experience what it is, like challenge our thought, as opposed to going, oh, there's something over there. What? Because this is what we do as humans. This is what all animals do. you know, and I'm talking about the animal part of us, is that we have to understand our environment to survive. So we interpret, we layer on whatever reference we can onto a new experience, try to make sense of it. And that's really what I think holds us back when it comes to sort of these sorts of topics, is that we really don't want to be trying to layer on some preconceived notion or some frame of reference. We really want to try to be open to something and just be able to say, I understand absolutely nothing about this, but let me just go with it and see where it goes, you know. And I think that's really why awakening can be such a painful process as well for so many people, because it shakes up everything we think we know. All the things that we kind of give us security in the physical world, all of a sudden are upended, and we're just sort of thrown into this chaos. You know, I hear the story over and over again when people are just starting to awaken because of some experience, and they just don't know what's going on in their life anymore. But that's part of the process, the brilliant part of the process, because it means that you're allowing everything you thought you knew to just sort of go by the wayside, and to be open to whatever is actually just kind of coming, bizarre things are coming along in front of you. Does that make sense when I explain it like that?
I think so. So, however, so during that awakening, if you do come to a realization about a subject like this in this area, but isn't there a point where we can say that we know something, or at least we can say this individually, like I know this about the afterlife? Because a big theme I'm hearing from you is basically that we can't know it all. And while I do agree with that, I also think I feel like I'm disagreeing with you in my heart about this a little bit, because at least for me personally, I feel like there's things I can say that I know about this other dimension. And then I can have a conversation with my mom who's passed away and be able to relate that to her. And she agrees and understands what I'm saying. And I can experience this element, and I can say, this is true. I can say this is true. And I can I can report this as a journalist basically to other people. And I can say that I think it's true. I can't say it is true, I know for a fact, but I can say that via my reporting, I think it's true. So isn't there a point when we can say that something is true? Or do we always have to be in this wibbly wobbly area of not really knowing because we can't know because it's the afterlife and it's beyond our comprehension?
Well, I don't think it's just the afterlife, though. I think it's this life, too. I think if we start getting into these absolutes, even in this life, we can kind of get ourselves into trouble. I think anytime we get into absolutes, we can get into trouble. I know when it comes to my experience with the afterlife, I've never really kind of come out and said, this is absolutely categorically true. What I have said is my experience is suggestive that this is how things are, or my experience after 1,000 communications suggests that this is the way things are. But I personally just try to stay away from absolutisms about that life and this life, you know. And when I was talking about a few minutes ago about the awakening experience, what I'm talking about is in this life, when the awakening starts to happen, when all of these inexplicable events starts to happen, which happens quite a lot around people, and they don't understand why the paintings are moving, the furniture, or the things are, all of these weird things are going on. It's the beginning of an awakening. And what I think is important, people often, it can be very, very discombobulating. It can be really challenging. It can make us feel very insecure because everything we thought we knew about the physical universe now seems not to be true. Is that the important thing in the midst of an awakening like that is to remain open to allowing whatever those things are just be what they are, instead of always trying to understand and interpret them, because then we run the risk of trying to impose a frame of reference that applies to the physical world onto phenomena that are not part of the physical world.
Although we could argue that it's not part of the physical world, but our world is not even the physical world either. We're dealing with like interdimensional physics, which maybe could be understood if we were to focus our resources in that direction. And maybe the next, or part of the next eras of human advancement would be to be able to understand these concepts, and maybe all those ETs flying around their UFOs, warping in and out of different dimensions, maybe they did figure those things out and were able to apply it. I don't know.
That's a warning, Karen. That's a rabbit hole. Warning.
Yeah. Yeah, those
well,
are
I can't comment. I'm not going to, I won't comment outside my own frame of reference, because obviously that doesn't really get us anywhere. But all I'm saying is that what we thought we knew about this universe in the early 1900s is very different from the universe we understand now. So we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing, we're constantly learning different things as we go, which is why, Newtonian physics much of that was displaced by quantum physics, et cetera, and quantum will probably be displaced by something else. So I have a tendency, because we're constantly, even in this world, things are changing, we're learning, we're evolving and discovering different things. I have a tendency not to say, absolutely, we know this, because 80 years from now, something else will come along and we'll go, oh, all the things we thought we knew are actually not the way they are. So I really just try to just speak from what I've experienced and just extrapolate from that what it suggests, if that makes sense.
And I also think it's your experience as a very talented journalist who doesn't, who knows through your training not to muddy the waters by making conclusions either, which could, I think it's kind of part of the objectivity, which is important. Somebody was saying something?
No, Corey was warning me about rattles.
I mean, while between us talking, I heard somebody beginning to talk.
No, I was just gonna say, I just wish it was a little bit less subjective. I've had quite a few experiences, but they mean something to me. They really, if I describe them to other people, they just don't get it. You know what I'm saying? I just wish it was a little bit more cut and dry.
And the most meaningful, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The most hard-hitting experiences for me has been when the subject has gone into the objective. And so that does mean a lot for me. For example, meeting somebody astrally, getting their information and learning their story, and then looking them up on Facebook, finding their memorial page, things like that. And that's also when people's paradigms, I think, explode, because both realities come crashing together. And that's something that I try to promote. And I think that is also the idea behind evidential mediumship. I'm sorry, Karen, you were going to say something?
I couldn't remember what I was going to say, but I was just going to say, in terms of evidential mediumship, the idea of evidence, if we use the idea of evidence, it's like it's supposed to prove something. But I don't think, if somebody does not want to believe this and is not open to this, it doesn't matter what you tell them, they're not going to believe it. It's, this is where the subjectivity comes in. You can give the most extraordinary information as a medium to somebody. If they still don't want to believe it, they're going to, and I know this because I did this myself in the first year, they'll look for every other explanation of how you could have got that information that precludes having actually communicated with their loved one. So the one thing I have stopped trying to do is convince anybody of anything. I've really come to realize that you can offer as much information, as much detail as you possibly can. All of it can suggest that their person is there, but if that person is not open to believing that, nothing you say will convince them.
Yeah, it's the same thing we see in our group, a lot of people coming in with mental backflips, because it's like something happened to make them question their reality, but now they're stuck in this cycle of having to deny that it's real. So they come in and they're like, I have all these explanations for why this happens. Near-death experiences are just delusions created by wish fulfillment combined with seeing the lights of the operating theater, and then this is caused by, and it's like the person trying to convince themselves. And they're in that cycle, and it's not, no one's going to take them out of that unless they're specifically asking for it. Then maybe then they're actually opening up to it. But yeah, we see this a lot in these debates and discussions, I think. All right, well, let's kind of wrap things up a little bit. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts for Karen before we kind of finish off this interview?
I do. I kind of, on the topic that we're just discussing, I think my analytical brain thinks about it or wonders about it. So if we have the potential to have so many aspects of ourselves, right? So say we're in the afterlife, but we're operating in 6 different places, right? Our consciousness is doing that. Then it's vibration based. So would those other aspects of us potentially be in different vibrational states, having different experiences? And then which one of those are the ones we're connecting into, having our multidimensional reality, right? And then which one of those are coming to a medium to communicate? Like, I think that's what blows my brain apart, thinking about how we can be operating in different space times and which aspect of us is doing the communicating, channeling of the information. Does that make sense?
And I think the glue that's holding all these different aspects together would be for what we call the higher self, or the, you know, the oversoul.
Oversoul, yeah.
And then that's the glue. So there can be 50 different versions of Cyrus, but they may not even be fully conscious of each other at the same time sometimes, but there's that glue maybe holding them together. That's my interpretation. Karen, I know it's a question for you, so let me turn it back.
Yeah, it's really not something I can comment on because it's not my experience. I just, you know, communicate with a single consciousness. So if one consciousness is conscious in 5 dimensions or not, I don't know. All I know is that if I'm communicating with somebody's mother, I'm just talking to their mother as their mother. So it's probably more of a question for Cyrus. It's really beyond the remit of my experience.
Have you ever spoken to a 13th dimensional purple alien, Karen?
I have not, but I look forward to it.
I haven't either.
It's quite interesting.
I have one more question that you could, I don't know, it'd be interesting to see what your experience has been, Karen. Have you ever, so typically it sounds like our process of growth tends to be one more towards love and forgiveness, more towards that higher vibrational awareness. But have you ever communicated with or had experience with a soul that's like fixed? No, I'm going to stay angry. I don't want to grow in that way, or doesn't evolve in that way toward a more loving perspective?
Well, I really do feel it seems that everybody seems to progress, heal, and grow in their own time. It's like this life here. Some people move forward in leaps and bounds, and some people really don't make a lot of progress between 8 and 80, you know.
Right.
I have come across people who, for example, one example I remember is somebody's father who, she had been to many mediums over the years, and he had never come through. He'd never come to talk to her. And it was an abusive relationship. And after about 20 years after he died, she came to me, and he eventually came that one time. But, and he came with an apology, and I could feel from him, sometimes you feel a person and you can feel they're energized and you can feel they're really making an effort to get ahead. They're only a year in the spirit world and they're already, you can see there's a change in their healing. You know, so this 20 years later, this guy kind of saunters in with his hands in his pockets and because that's the way I saw him, you know, and he's apologetic and he's realizing he was wrong. He had been very abusive and he was realizing he was wrong. And he's only now, but it's taken him 20 years to get to that point. You know, so, but again, what's time? Right. You know, our construct. But certainly I've felt definitely a difference in the energy by somebody who has gone over and immediately, and even my own fiance, I really saw, I mean, our relationship, and I just have to say this because it kind of circles back to what we talked about originally. Our relationship now is actually quite different than it was 8 years ago when he died. It's changed and grown over time, you know, but it would have changed and grown over time if he hadn't died, you know. So, but I really, to answer your, hopefully, I hope I'm answering your question. It really seems to be up to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So one person can be coming back and apologizing and making things right and trying to help and trying to be useful and helpful after a year, and another person seems to take 20 of what we understand to be 20 years. Yeah. That answers your question.
It makes me think about the classes, Cyrus, that you've experienced that they have over there, that they go, you know, learning, continuing education in the astral kind of thing, right? Like your mom learning how to communicate with people over here. It's like, what kind of classes go on over there? You know what I mean? That cause these people to awaken. Like that's what it blows. It's the whole thing. It just blows my mind.
Bueller.
Yeah?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wait, Bueller. Wait, is this a Ferris Bueller reference? What are you saying?
Yes.
Bored
in the classroom.
Yeah, you know, I think that there, I guess we're going on a different topic now, but it's just, yeah, I mean, even with classes, trying to think of all the different types of things like that I've seen, I'm aware of there being classes about EVP communication. And it's why that there's suddenly so much EVP communication with people's deceased loved ones. In fact, I don't know if you have any interest at all in this, Karen, but there's so many people that I've talked to now who are talking to like their deceased spouses through basic recording devices. And then I think, oh, I'll bet it's just their imaginations. And then they send me the audio file. I don't hear anything. Then I keep listening to it. And then it's kind of like when you're looking at one of those like image puzzles where you have to stare at it to find the pattern. And like once I hear the pattern, it's like, oh my God, I'm hearing a whole conversation happen. And I don't think it's a coincidence that there's so much EVP communication now, as well as kind of me hearing about there being classes that they are learning how to communicate with us through that method. And they physically go to a class with demonstrations of like, okay, you project your consciousness into this device from this distance, from this angle. But that's just, again, stuff I've experienced and heard about. As you have pointed out, Karen, doesn't mean it's the gospel, but it makes
sense, in some ways. I don't know exactly what the class is, but it does make sense, because we know that people don't just die and suddenly become all-knowing, all-powerful, all light beings, so we didn't know how to do that when you were here. Presumably you've got to learn something at some point, right?
What's tripped me out is having astral experiences and talking about these subjects with people on that side, because that often happens a lot. Because if I'm having a legit astral experience, the first thing I'm doing is like, whoever I'm around, I'm like, I'm astral traveling right now. My name is Cyrus. I'm having an out-of-body experience. Please, I'll grab somebody and try to talk to them. And then they'll be tripped out as well. And then they'll be highly interested in similar subjects we're talking about, higher selves and multidimensionality. And they know about all this and they operate within it, but they also don't know about a lot. And so talking to somebody who is coming from this world can be extremely fascinating even for them. And so that's another perspective of mine that has grown, is just finding even they consider this to be esoteric metaphysical concepts. And it's, they're more integrated with it, but it's not something that they're experiencing on a daily basis. Anyway, I'm now hogging all the time by talking when it should be the guest or the patrons. But does anybody have any last thoughts or questions they want to toss in there?
Dee has been she's got her hand up for like an hour now.
Dee, but your mic is off. You can just talk, and it's been open.
Yeah. Well, no, I just had a real quick question, kind of what we were talking about earlier, but I just wondered, Karen, if you've had experience with like negative entities, something trying to influence you or, come through in a negative way, and how did you handle that?
I've never happened to me.
Great.
Never. And I think part of it is because, first off, it's never been part of my experience that I've gone into the spirit world and I've communicated with people in the spirit world who are not nice people here. And they're not necessarily particularly nice there, but they're a lot nicer than they were,
Yeah.
And I've come across people who've been very dry and irritable there, but I've never come across this concept of the negative entity sort of thing, free floating around. This never happened to me. I don't understand how there could be a God in a heaven and that sort of thing happening. What I have noticed in my experience is that if people believe that is possible, they can make it happen.
Right.
And it's not because there's a negative entity stuck to them. It's like a negative attitude or negative thought stuck to them. I've had plenty of negative entities in the physical world stuck to me, I can tell you, on the New York subway, but I've never spirit world come. And I really feel that I've come across what I have come across. I can say is people coming to me saying I've got a negative spirit stuck to me and sucking the life out of me. And I've had absolutely no sense of any presence with that person. It's happened quite a few times, actually, over the years. What I firmly believe is going on there is that they believe that that's happening, and that's the reason why all sorts of things in their life is going bad.
Right.
What's actually happening, it's because they believe it. They're manifesting. Their thought forms are manifesting all of this stuff. And what I found is that sometimes I don't do this, but I've seen other people do it, where they'll do some ritual to get rid of the negative entity, because then the person in their mind thinks, oh, they're gone, and I can go on with my life. Whereas the truth of the fact was never anything there in the first place. And somebody's just come up with this ritual to make them believe the thing is gone because it was just about a belief thing to begin with, you know.
Right.
So I've never experienced it other than that, or other than real people walking around on 2 feet. I've experienced negative energy with them, but otherwise not. No, never.
Cool.
You know? And it does, and I'm glad you brought it up because it does come up with this. One of my most loathed conversations, the idea of spirit attachment. You know.
Yeah.
Never actually really experienced that. And the other truth is that even if somebody did have an abusive father, an abusive person in their life who was trying to communicate with them, my experience of that, and I did have somebody whose father was trying to communicate with her, and it had been a very abusive relationship in her childhood before she got out of the house. And she became very much aware that he was constantly present, and she was thinking, because she'd heard other people say this, this is the negative, her father was now this negative attachment, sucking life out of her. And so she came to me and we communicated with him. And the truth, what was going on was that the father had been growing and healing in the spirit world. He'd been about 7 or 8 years there at this point. And he was trying to apologize.
Oh, beautiful.
And because she had these preconceived notions that people had put in her head about attachment and negative entities, she assumed that's what was going on there. And she could not see that her father was trying to apologize.
Oh.
And so when we actually communicated with them, we spent a long time, an hour and a half, it was a really long session, to go through all of these things with her for her to realize that, you know, so again, it comes back to the idea of perception and misperception.
Right. Well, thank you for answering that. And thank you for this whole hour. It's been fantastic.
Oh,
I
good.
enjoyed it.
Interesting.
All I'll say is there's a great book called Deadly Departed by Jock Brokus, but that's just my thoughts. Well, I guess we're going to wrap things up. Karen, is there anything you want to share with us about future projects you have going on? Or I know you're always working in media and doing cool shows and YouTube and stuff like that. So is there anything you want to let people know about?
Well, I do sometimes. I don't know where everybody is, but I'm in New York at the moment, and I'm doing sort of workshops in New York. And what I'll probably do next year is teaching on the SNUI, which is the SNU is the governing body of the Arthur Findlay College, and they have an online school which is called the SNUI. And we'll be teaching on that again next year. So we'll be doing some classes there if you wanted to. It's only like $25 a year or something if you wanted to come to some classes. And, you know, I might do some of my own online. I did some online message circles and stuff for people outside New York. So they're always kind of fun and experimental. And I don't know, just check out my website. I'm usually putting extra stuff on YouTube or writing some article or other, and I usually post all of it. I link to all of it on my website as well, if you are interested in any of that stuff.
Yeah, I'll put the links in the description when I put this up on YouTube. And well, I guess that's it. Thank you, Karen, for coming out and telling us about your perspectives. And
because my agent, like I said, is negotiating for my book, my manuscript, which is the long version of that story you read, called "Till Death Don't Us Part." So send some positive energy that all goes well, and hopefully we'll see that in the shelves this year by the end of 2020.
Great, yeah. Till death don't us part. Don't put that in the cell phone spell checker by mistake, though. It might mess up a little bit. But
system correcting you, yeah.
But that is the name of the book that you will have coming out. So let us know when that comes out. And I guess that's it. So thanks again, everybody. And you have been watching Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. Thanks for all the people who watched the show. And I'll see you guys on the next video, the next interview. So till then.